Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I always believed in loyalty. For me, it wasn't just an expectation in marriage, it was the bedrock of life itself. Claire and I built our 12 years together on what I thought was mutual respect, love, and trust. She was everything I'd dreamed of, a brilliant, warm-hearted woman with a knack for making anyone feel at ease. Our life was steady, if not extraordinary. But that steadiness was exactly what I cherished. We lived in a quaint suburb with well-manicured lawns, an inviting neighborhood, and neighbors who waved at each other. It was the type of place where nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen, where routine was the rhythm of existence. But sometimes, when life is too quiet, the storm comes unnoticed. Claire began coming home later than usual. It started innocuously, excuses about long meetings and unexpected deadlines. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, her job as a marketing consultant often demanded evening conferences or last-minute client calls. But then, there were the subtle changes. She grew more protective of her phone, quickly turning the screen away when I entered the room. Her texts and notifications, once shared casually, now lived behind the safety of a passcode I didn't know. It was a Friday night when my first alarm bell went off. We'd just finished dinner, a quiet meal of grilled salmon and steamed vegetables, the kind Claire loved. She left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, something she never did. I was wiping down the counters when it buzzed, the screen lighting up. The message was short, playful. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again. The name on the screen read, Megan. My stomach tightened. Claire had never mentioned a close friend named Megan. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the message. Maybe it was innocent, a coworker recalling a fun team dinner. But the phrasing, it felt too intimate, too personal. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I let the thought simmer in the back of my mind, hoping, praying, that it was nothing. Claire returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, picking up her phone without so much as a glance at me. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and went upstairs to prepare for bed. I followed shortly after, feeling like a shadow in my own home. Over the next few weeks, the pieces began to fall into place. Claire's yoga retreats became more frequent, her work trips extended by a day or two, and her stories about client dinners grew vaguer. I started noticing the small things, the subtle change in her perfume, the way she hummed while getting ready, and the odd times when she seemed happier than usual. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, while Claire was in the shower, I acted on impulse. Her laptop was open on the coffee table. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the touchpad. This wasn't who I was. I trusted Claire, or at least I thought I did. But the nagging voice in my head wouldn't let me rest. I clicked into her email. At first, it seemed harmless, newsletters, client updates, and the usual spam. But then I saw it, a chain of messages with someone named Nate. Nate wasn't a coworker. The tone of the email started professional but quickly shifted. Inside jokes, late-night messages about missing each other, and one photo of Claire smiling in a hotel lobby. The timestamp matched a weekend she'd claimed to be at a yoga retreat. My blood ran cold. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, struggling to breathe. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built a life with, was a stranger. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating. For the next week, I buried myself in work, avoiding Claire as much as possible. I wasn't ready to confront her, not without more evidence. If I accused her now, she'd deny everything. I needed the truth, cold and undeniable. That's when I called Ben, an old college friend turned private investigator. He was discreet, professional, and, most importantly, someone I trusted. Ben confirmed what I already suspected. Claire wasn't going to yoga retreats. She wasn't attending late-night client dinners. She was meeting Nate, a tall, sharp-dressed accountant who worked at a nearby firm. Ben provided photos, timestamps, and even a log of the hotels they frequented. It wasn't just an affair, it was a full-blown double life. I felt a rage I'd never known before. But I didn't let it consume me. Rage is messy, reckless. I needed to be calm, deliberate. Claire thought she held all the cards, that her secrets were safe. But she didn't know I'd reshuffled the deck. The night before her next yoga retreat, I stayed up late, pretending to work in my home office. Claire kissed me goodnight and went upstairs, her suitcase already packed. I stared at her retreating figure, a mixture of anger and sadness twisting in my chest. This was it, the last time she'd think she could outmaneuver me. When the morning came, Claire was her usual self. She kissed me goodbye, her eyes bright and carefree. "See you Sunday," she said, waving as she walked out the door. I watched her drive away, my mind already racing with what I needed to do next. That afternoon, I called Ben. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. "Let's make sure she knows she can't get away with this." Claire didn't return until Sunday evening, just as she'd promised. By then, I had everything prepared. My mind had been spinning since the moment she walked out the door on Friday, but I kept my hand steady. If she wanted to play games, I was determined to beat her at her own. When she finally walked through the door, the scent of her perfume hit me first, light, floral, but stronger than usual, as though she'd refreshed it just before coming inside. Her suitcase rolled behind her, and she smiled casually, tossing her keys into the bowl by the door. "Hey," she said, her voice light, almost musical. "How was your weekend?" I stood in the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter, a glass of wine in hand. "Uneventful," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How was the spa?" Claire hesitated for the briefest moment, her smile faltering before returning to its polished form. "Relaxing. Just what I needed. You should come next time. It's really lovely there." "Maybe," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "But I'd have to be sure it's worth the trip." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "What does that mean?" I set the glass down gently, meeting her gaze. "It means you've been lying to me, Claire. And I know everything." Her face froze, the practiced cheerfulness draining away. For a moment, she didn't move, her hand still on the strap of her purse. Then, slowly, she straightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" I asked, my voice sharp now. "Let me help you remember." I reached under the counter and retrieved the folder I'd prepared. It was thin but damning. Photos of her and Nate walking into a luxury hotel downtown, holding hands, laughing. Receipts for restaurants she'd charged to our shared credit card, dinners at places far from the yoga retreats she'd claimed to be attending. The final page was a copy of her itinerary from the private investigator, complete with dates, locations, and timestamps. I slid the folder across the counter toward her. "Still don't know what I'm talking about." Claire's hands trembled as she picked up the folder. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the photos and documents inside. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she looked up at me, her face pale. "It's not what it looks like," she said weakly. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "That's the best you've got? Come on, Claire. At least try to come up with something better than that." She closed the folder and set it on the counter, her fingers still resting on it as if it might disappear if she held it tightly enough. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. "A stupid, terrible mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Claire, this wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was planned. You lied to me, over and over again, to sneak around with him. How long has this been going on?" She flinched at the sharpness in my voice but didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 6 months. I clenched my fists, the muscles in my jaw tightening. 6 months. Half a year of lies, deceit, and betrayal. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this to me? To us? Claire looked down at the counter, avoiding my eyes. I don't know, she said. It wasn't about you, or about us. It was. It was about me. I felt empty, I guess. Like something was missing. Empty. I spat. Empty. Claire, I gave you everything. A home, a life, my trust. What more could you possibly want? Tears filled her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Not now. Not after everything I'd uncovered. She reached out a hand, as if to touch me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said coldly. Don't even try. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I can fix this. We can fix this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Fix this? Claire, there's no fixing this. You destroyed us the moment you decided to sneak off with him. You think you can just say sorry, and everything will go back to normal? Her tears were falling freely now, streaking her mascara. I love you, she whispered. I still love you. I felt a pang of something, pain, anger, maybe even regret, but I buried it. You don't love me, I said. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavily between us. Then I pulled a second folder from behind me, this one thicker. I set it on the counter next to the first. What's this? She asked, her voice trembling. Divorce papers, I said simply. Her breath hitched, and she stared at the folder as if it might explode. No, she said, shaking her head. No, I can't. I won't sign those. You don't have a choice, I said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Everything's in order. You'll get your fair share, but that's it. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. Please, don't do this, she begged, her voice desperate now. I can't lose you. I can't lose our life. You should have thought about that before you threw it away, I said. Now, pack your things. I'm done. Claire collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her actions. Upstairs, I shut the bedroom door and leaned against it, my chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. This was only the beginning. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. The days following our confrontation were tense and heavy, filled with an eerie quietness that had never existed in our home before. Claire hadn't moved out, not yet. She spent her days moping around the house, her movements mechanical, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal. I, on the other hand, threw myself into preparations. I consulted with my lawyer daily, ensuring there were no loose ends in the divorce proceedings. Everything from the house to the accounts was meticulously planned. Claire wasn't going to leave this marriage empty-handed, but she wasn't going to take advantage of me either. By Thursday, she finally broke the silence. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book while my mind raced through the events of the last week. She entered quietly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Can we talk? She asked, her voice soft and trembling. I closed the book, looking up at her with an expression that I hoped was unreadable. What's there to talk about? Claire hesitated, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I've been thinking, about everything. About what I've done. And I need you to understand how sorry I am. I sighed heavily, leaning back in my chair. I understand you're sorry, Claire. But sorry doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't undo the lies, the betrayal. It doesn't fix this. I know, she said quickly, stepping closer. I know I can't undo it, but I can try to make it right. I've ended things with Nate. I told him it was over. I want to focus on us. On fixing our marriage. I stared at her, my expression hard. You think ending things with him changes anything? You think it wipes the slate clean? I'm not asking for a clean slate, she said desperately. I'm asking for a chance. Just one chance to prove that I can be better. That I can make this right. Her words hung in the air, but I felt no pity. No sympathy. My anger, once a raging fire, had cooled into something colder, more resolute. I stood up, towering over her as I spoke. Claire, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed my trust, my faith in you. You turned our marriage into a lie. Do you honestly think there's anything left to save? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't move, didn't try to wipe them away. I love you, she whispered. I always have. Please, let me show you. I shook my head, stepping past her. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. It's as simple as that. Claire crumpled into a chair, her sobs echoing through the house. I felt a pang of guilt, a fleeting urge to comfort her, but I ignored it. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. That night, as I sat in my office reviewing the final draft of the divorce papers, my phone buzzed. It was Ben, the private investigator. Hey, he said when I answered. I thought you'd want to know, Nate's been talking. What do you mean? I asked, my interest piqued. Well, let's just say he's not as noble as your wife might think. He's been bragging to his buddies about their affair, about how easy it was to manipulate her. He even told one of them that he never saw a future with her, that she was just a convenient fling. The anger that I had worked so hard to suppress flared up again. He said that? Yep. I've got it all recorded. If you want, I can send you the file. I leaned back in my chair, considering his offer. On one hand, I didn't need to know more. I already had all the proof I needed for the divorce. On the other hand, hearing the truth from Nate's own mouth might be just the thing to finally put this chapter of my life to rest. Send it, I said. When the file arrived, I plugged in my headphones and hit play. Nate's voice was smug, dripping with arrogance as he recounted his version of the affair. He mocked Claire, calling her naive and desperate. He bragged about how he could string her along while keeping his own life intact. He even joked about the gifts she'd bought him with our joint money. By the time the recording ended, my hands were shaking with rage. Claire had betrayed me, but Nate had used her, humiliated her. And in some twisted way, that made it worse. I had thought confronting Claire was the final act of this nightmare, but now I realized there was one more thing I needed to do. The next evening, I paid Nate a visit. He lived in a sleek apartment downtown, the kind of place that screamed disposable income and shallow success. When he opened the door, his smug grin vanished the moment he saw me. Mark, he said, his voice feigning surprise. What are you doing here? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped inside, forcing him to move back. He looked nervous, his eyes darting toward his phone on the counter. We need to talk, I said, my voice calm but firm. About what? He asked, his hands fidgeting. Look, if this is about Claire. It's not about Claire, I interrupted. It's about you. About the way you've treated her. About the way you've disrespected me, my marriage, and everything we built. Nate's bravado faltered, his shoulders slumping slightly. Look, man, I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant, I snapped. What you did was despicable. You used her, lied to her, and laughed about it behind her back. But you know what? I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to make sure you understand something. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. What's that? I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. You're nothing. You're a parasite, feeding off other people's lives because you can't build your own. And people like you. You don't win. You don't get to come out on top. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of my words sinking in. Then I turned and walked out, leaving him alone in his sterile apartment. When I got home, Claire was waiting in the living room. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "Taking care of something," I said simply. She nodded, not pressing further. "I signed the papers," she said after a pause. "They're on the counter." I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. "Good. This is the right thing to do." Claire didn't respond, and I didn't stay to hear what she might have said. Instead, I went upstairs, closing the door to our bedroom, my bedroom, behind me. The weight of the day settled over me, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. The unraveling was nearly complete, and soon, I would be free. The week Claire moved out felt surreal. The house, once filled with her laughter, her perfume, and the echoes of our life together, now felt hollow. Yet, in that emptiness, I found a strange kind of peace. The divorce was progressing smoothly, and I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen sipping coffee, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Ben, my private investigator. The subject line read, "You'll want to see this." Curious, I opened the attachment. What I saw made my heart race. It was a photo of Claire, not with Nate, but with another man. They were seated at a cafe, laughing, her hand resting lightly on his. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, long after she claimed to have ended things with Nate. I slammed the phone down, the familiar sting of betrayal rising like bile. Had she moved on so quickly? Or had there been another layer to her lies all along? Either way, it didn't matter. My anger surged again, but it was different this time. It wasn't the kind of fury that consumed, it was the kind that clarified. I wasn't going to let her hold any power over me anymore. A week later, I received a text from Claire. She asked to meet at our favorite cafe, the one where we used to spend lazy Sunday mornings over coffee and croissants. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wanted closure, and perhaps this was her attempt at offering it. When I arrived, she was already there, seated at a corner table. She looked different, tired, subdued. Her usual confidence had been replaced with something softer, almost fragile. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I'm not sure why I'm here," I replied flatly. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to talk to you. To explain." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Explain what, Claire? That you've moved on already? That I wasn't even worth a few weeks of reflection before you jumped into someone else's arms?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you talking about?" I pulled up the photo on my phone and slid it across the table. She stared at it, her face going pale. "Mark, this isn't what you think." "Really?" I scoffed. "Because it looks exactly like what I think." She hesitated, then set the phone down. "That's not another affair. That's my brother." I blinked, caught off guard. "Your brother?" "Yes," she said, her voice steadying. "He lives in another state. We're not close, but he reached out after hearing about the divorce. We've been meeting to talk, to reconnect. I didn't tell you because I thought it didn't matter anymore." I studied her face, searching for any signs of deceit. To my surprise, there were none. Why would Ben send this to me without context? I muttered, more to myself than to her. "Maybe he assumed the worst," she said quietly. "Like you did." The weight of her words hung between us. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I let my anger blind me? Had I been too quick to assume the worst of her? I still don't understand why you asked me here, I said finally. She looked down at her cup, her voice soft. I wanted to tell you that I'm leaving. Not just the house, but the city. I need a fresh start. Somewhere far away from all this. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, regret, maybe. But it quickly passed. I think that's for the best. She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You were a good husband, Mark. Better than I deserved. I hope you find happiness. I didn't respond, and after a moment, she stood and left. I watched her go, a strange mix of relief and finality settling over me. Life returned to a new normal in the weeks that followed. I threw myself into work, picked up old hobbies, and even started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years. The divorce was finalized, and the weight of Claire's betrayal no longer felt as crushing. I was rebuilding, piece by piece. Then, one evening, a package arrived at my doorstep. It was small, unmarked, with no return address. Puzzled, I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a single sheet of paper with 3 words, play the file. I hesitated, a cold dread creeping up my spine. But curiosity won out. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the only file it contained, a video. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Nate in a dimly lit bar, talking to someone I couldn't quite make out. Their conversation was loud, animated, and then I heard it. Yeah, it was all part of the deal, Nate was saying, a smug grin on his face. She gets the money, and I get to have some fun. Easy as that. The other man chuckled. You sure she'll hold up her end? She doesn't have a choice, Nate replied. Her hands are tied. If she tries to back out, I'll make sure Mark finds out everything. The video ended, leaving me frozen in place. My mind reeled. What deal? What had Claire agreed to? And why would Nate threaten her with me? Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Claire's affair with Nate wasn't about love or passion. It was leverage. But for what? The answer came 2 days later in the form of a phone call. It was Claire. Her voice was shaky, panicked. Mark, I need to talk to you. Please. I almost hung up, but something in her tone stopped me. What is it? It's Nate, she said quickly. He's been blackmailing me. He threatened to ruin you if I didn't go along with him. My breath caught. What are you talking about? Your business, she said. He has something, proof of a deal you made years ago. Something that could get you in trouble. He said if I didn't keep seeing him, he'd expose it. I felt the room spin. Years ago, I'd signed a gray area contract with a major client. It had been buried, forgotten, or so I thought. But now, it seemed, Nate had uncovered it. What did you do, Claire? I asked, my voice cold. I was trying to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. But I didn't know he'd use it against me too. Please, Mark, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The call ended, leaving me stunned. What had started as a story of betrayal was now a web of manipulation and deceit that I hadn't even begun to unravel. For the first time since it all began, I wasn't sure who the real villain was, or if I'd been one all along.